Well, welcome everybody to today's webinar, which is the first in our Broadband Leadership Series. It's co-hosted by Illinois Extension, the Benton Institute for Broadband and Society, and the Illinois Office of Broadband. We welcome Matt Schmidt and Bill Coleman, who work in state broadband efforts for some time now, as Matt runs the Office of Broadband and its respective grant programs, including Illinois Connected Communities. And Bill and the Benton Institute of Broadband and Society provide education and assistance to those Illinois communities planning for broadband adoption, use, access, and equity. Before turning it over to Matt and Bill and our panel of presenters today, I want to encourage participants to utilize the chat space to ask questions at any time during the presentation and during the discussion. And when today's speakers are finished, we will have a Q&A, and later this afternoon, I'll send a follow-up email to those who've registered for today's program, and that will include the slides for the session today and any handouts or useful resource links that we hope to share with the group, as well as a link to the recording for this webinar. Okay, and I just want to say thank you again, and I'll hand it over to you now, Matt.
Well, thank you so much, Nancy. Again, it's great to join you for another important webinar, and in this case, our second annual Developing Broadband Leadership webinar series. Again, I'm Matt Schmidt with the Illinois Office of Broadband, and the idea here is you're going to not hear a whole lot from me, but you'll hear today in the coming sessions from Bill Coleman, consultant to one of our program collaborators, the Benton Institute for Broadband and Society, as well as a number of different experts in the field. And the goal of this webinar series, as it was last year, is to seize the broadband moment. I think the past year of life, whether it's remote learning or working from home or telehealth, has revealed to all of us who weren't already in the know the critical importance of broadband in our daily lives. And so in Illinois, our Governor Pritzker and our General Assembly have had the foresight to invest in broadband. At $420 million, we have the country's largest in state investment in broadband, particularly in matching grants with our Connect Illinois program. But we understand that that investment alone is not enough. We've got to invest in community planning and engagement. And given the recent investment at the federal level in the American Rescue Plan Act, take advantage of the historic investment in broadband infrastructure that we're seeing in this country. What we're seeing right now likely will never happen again in our lifetimes. And so we need to seize this moment to take advantage of those state or federal funds and to solve our broadband challenges and put our communities in a position to compete in the years ahead. And so that's why we're investing in this broadband webinar series. And again, it's great to be here with our program collaborators, Illinois Extension, the Benton Institute for Broadband and Society. And as I said at the outset, I'm going to hand it over quickly to Bill. Bill, take it away from here.
Thank you, Matt, and welcome everyone. Thanks so much for joining. And I really agree with Matt that this is a unique opportunity time coming out of the pandemic with the dollars that are being directed towards broadband. And today's topic is really about this broadband development process. How do you go from the idea of not or just knowing that your broadband is inadequate to moving towards getting the investment in your community, in your county, to bring up broadband that not only meets today's needs, but positions your community for the future. And the role of community leaders is critical in this. We know that if things were easy, they would be done by now. So if the broadband development process was, we see a broadband provider sees an opportunity and invests money in that opportunity, and that's the broadband development process, it'd be much easier than it actually is. We know that it takes some intervention, and that's why the state of Illinois has invested so heavily. That's why the federal government is moving to invest heavily in broadband. We know that when things like electricity was being rolled out, when telephone was being rolled out, the marketplace did not really create a level playing field across the entire country. that once again, in those areas, it was the community leaders creating co-ops. It was federal governments creating programs to finance both electricity and telephone that provided for sustainable network development. And of course, why broadband now? And we've seen with the pandemic, you know, this has really made clear the importance of technology. We had seen technology affecting agriculture and education and healthcare and economic development long before the pandemic. But those were those early adopters. Those were kind of the folks in the middle who said, yeah, it's about time to get a website or start using social media. But almost overnight, we saw organizations being forced to adopt and adapt and innovate using technology to stay in business, whether that was a grocery store jumping into online ordering, healthcare providers jumping into telehealth visits, organizations that found all kinds of reasons not to innovate or not to get on board, as well as one thing we really recognized was the impact of regulations on the adoption of new technology. And I think especially telehealthcare is the biggest example of that, where providers just weren't really paid the same for telehealthcare visits as they were for in-office visits. And if providers don't get paid, they're not really interested. And so that really made when they suspended those rules around telehealth, we saw immediate use of telehealth care jump up. And now the question is, what will happen as we come out of the pandemic back to normal? What does that mean? What is the new normal? And one thing is certain is that working from home, telehealth care, different forms of education are definitely on the plate for the future. One thing we know about broadband is that everything is better with better broadband. That when you have a little bit of broadband, that works pretty good, but when you have higher levels of service capabilities, it really drives more use. Looking at this word salad of broadband terms and so on, this is something that kind of scares community leaders. There's all this information, all this technology, trying to decide between fiber optics and wireless and satellite and servers and routers, and people tend to think, oh, I'm not really capable of being a community leader on broadband because I don't know all this technology stuff. I get confused, and it seems like the experts are the ones who should solve this, and not community leaders. But one thing you should know is that you don't have to be a tech guru when you start working on community broadband issues. You may become one through the process by coming to webinars like this or working with consulting groups that are studying your community. You might identify many technology experts in your own community that can help you understand things. So I encourage you, as you think about broadband and you participate in our webinar series, which now includes 5 webinars over the next couple months. The next one is on Broadband 101, that the goal for you is to be able to put some of this information in different buckets. And so to get a conceptual framework of the technology issues and choices that your community might be making in the future. And so if you have that framework, within really just a short period of time, you'll be able to understand a lot more of these technical terms. And today, later in the program, we have our local experts, people who have actually been doing projects in the field that will testify that their knowledge of broadband and technology is such that people are actually asking them to come and advise their communities on what was a successful effort in Flanagan or in Brown County or in Southwest Illinois. When I was growing up, we had, of course, cable television was kind of new at that point, but we had regulated monopolies providing quality but boring services to everyone. Especially with telephone, the 1932 Telecom Act said that everyone should have a telephone at about the same price. And of course, we know that telephone service did not roll out 100% to everyone all at once. We saw differences in service levels. We saw limited long distance calling in rural areas. We saw the party lines stay in place for many years in rural places. But all in all, people, we made the big policy choice as Americans that people should have these services in place. But in 1996, the Telecom Act was passed, and that's the last major national telecommunications legislation that's been put in place. And the interesting thing about that act is that the internet is not even really mentioned in that act. It's all about telephone services and competitive telephone service. And as there's a philosophy at that time that the marketplace would bring competition and innovation to the Telecommunications Act. As I mentioned, things were kind of boring with the old Ma Bell. They said, well, you can't hook any other equipment to this network, but that was owned by Ma Bell. Innovation was the Princess phone that came out in pink, and that was their idea of innovation. But when we did get that Telecom Act, we did see competition emerge, but primarily for business customers, for hospitals, for schools, for large customers. And as a result, we saw less investment in rural places, areas that were less profitable to operate. And again, we did see the product innovation and the whole birth of the internet and home internet services and so on. We've seen now this technology convergence. Before we had the phone company and we had the cable company. Now you can't really tell the difference, and we've added cellular services onto this as well. But the emergence of the triple play, voice, video, and data by every provider. You see really the cable modem dominance over DSL as a technology, because the cable modems came in later. The capacity of that coaxial cable is higher than the twisted copper pair. And so that's why we see the dominance of Charter Spectrum and Comcast in particular, which have over half the customers in the country for broadband between the two of them. And then the emergence of fiber to the home and gigabit speeds. Those things have really made a huge difference in how we use technology. We know that high deployment costs and low subscription rates combine to inhibit private sector investment in some rural and urban areas. And this really does require that government intervention. In rural areas, we have the low density, and when we see places that have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 houses per road mile, that gets it's very difficult investment to think of somebody even at $100 a month in revenue from those customers. If that's $5,000, $6,000, $10,000 per house to get those areas connected, it takes a long time to get that investment back. In urban areas, the deployment, certainly there's a lot more people, but the deployment costs are greatly increased with trying to drill into city streets and under sidewalks and connect buildings. And so that can also be a real deterrent. We know that in urban areas, permitting is also, can be expensive and can take time, and providers don't like that. And then also building owners can get in the way of broadband deployment because they want a piece of that in the multifamily building market. They want to have some dollars coming to them as well. We also know that in both rural and urban areas, that people might have lower incomes, they might be older, and people of color, and lower adopters of technology for many reasons, effectively redlining of these areas because they see a limited marketplace. And that's a rational decision by these companies, especially the larger ones that are publicly traded, and their stock price is a huge part of this, return on investment, and so on. But we know that the public benefits from broadband exceed the private sector ROI. And so what I mean by this is that if you look at the balance sheets of a company, I mentioned just previously stock prices, return on investment, their balance sheet, their profit and loss statement, very specific things. And even by law, publicly traded companies are required to maximize that return on investment. A community has a very different balance sheet. They have things on it like economic development, access to education, quality of life, healthcare. We know that in communities, if those main street businesses are making use of technology to sell, to market, to get their supplies, to do everything in a more modern way using the benefits of the internet, their balance sheets are going to improve tremendously. But for the large company that may serve that community, that's just a blip on their radar screen. 10 more high-speed connections, or even 20 or 50 in a medium-sized community. And so the benefits, again, accrue to the community, but it's hard to get those paid for through the general subscription process. And so that's a critical, when people say, why is the government, why should our community invest in these networks? This balance sheet idea, I think, is a particularly illuminating for people, to get them to think about that as opposed to just the investment part of that. And so when we think about this community broadband development process, we've seen this happen across many communities, and to see how this whole thing comes together. How does it start? And I'll go through these in more detail, but generally there is an awakening. People, I think the pandemic was a thunderstorm in terms of people waking up and recognizing the need for broadband in their communities. But then it's just like any other economic development process, is how do you move this process forward? And data is a critical part of this. What information do we need to drive decisions? What is the role of the community? We've seen some communities decide to be their own broadband provider, owning their own networks. We see other communities that want to take a much more limited role. Who's there now? Who are the incumbents, and what are they doing now, and what are they willing to do? How can they help move those projects forward with the existing providers? You have to see are they going to be a partner for your community? And then feasibility. If you are going to make investment, that's a discussion. Feasibility is not just about can we do it? We know we can build fiber optics anywhere, undersea cables and satellites and all kinds of different technologies in place. But is it feasible in terms of the financial investment, and who's going to make that investment? And then finally, we're thinking about selecting what is our path that we're going to take to move this project forward, and all kinds of possibilities there as well. And so this awakening, sometimes community leaders learn from the area residents or businesses. They do a business retention program and find out from their business community that the internet services are inadequate, or from their community institutions, their schools or libraries or community colleges or hospitals, that they can't get the bandwidth they need. More and more, I would say that the majority of those needs are met by the private sector. You know, it's a real 80-20 kind of rule on this, that 80% of the revenue comes from 20% of the customers. And so it's oftentimes, if we would add cell towers into this mix, that these big institutions are the ones that drive investment decisions in your community. And you may be surprised when you do your data gathering that there's providers that are actually competing for that business. Sometimes community leaders will go to a conference and learn about what other communities are doing, seeing this as an issue, and then bring that back to their community. Oftentimes it's a personal broadband circumstance. I know of a senator in a state where everything was great. He didn't really think broadband was much of a problem until the pandemic hit. And suddenly his kids could not, or his grandkids could not go to school from home because the internet services were lacking. Suddenly now for him, broadband is a big issue after being lobbied intensively by broadband advocates in his area for years. That really changed. And so again, I think that this awakening has really happened nationwide, and that's why everyone's talking broadband now. In terms of gathering data, reviewing public broadband data is a first place to go. And the FCC has maps. They call them the 477 maps. Those are a good place to start. When it gets to the detail of those, you have to be aware that's not the only source of information. That data is provided by providers to the federal government, the FCC. And if they can serve one house in a census block, they can claim that entire census block, even though that may be 5 miles across, they can claim that whole census block as served. You can learn about community best practices. You'll learn about some communities today that are working on broadband. And through this series, you'll learn a lot more about what other communities are doing, both in Illinois and across the country. Community meetings, certainly a huge part of the gathering data process. And that with a survey can really tell you what people in the community are thinking. Is the service reliable? Is it affordable? Does it meet the needs of kids trying to go to school, people working from home, and so on? And so these meetings are really essential, and they can really help you, again, fill in that data on the maps beyond the FCC information. Many communities will use different speed tests where people dial in and they can test your broadband speed and be able to map that. I will tell you that the GIS technology is more and more valuable in broadband because of the different programs that are available and their rules and regulations. Trying to find projects can be a challenge. It wasn't that long ago that you'd say, well, let's do this whole county, or let's do multiple townships and seek funding from that for that. And that's become more challenging in the last couple years for a variety of reasons. And then certainly in interviewing your existing providers, that's a critical step. If you find out you can work with your incumbent providers, that's certainly the most cost-effective, straightest path towards better broadband service. But if you can't get that commitment, that's a real challenge. Once you have gathered all this information, it's time for some real serious policy discussion in your own community. It's important then to kind of create the vision statement about what it is that you're really trying to pursue. Because without that kind of consensus in your community about what's important, what's good enough, are we trying to solve today's problems, or are we planning for the future? Do you want to be kind of adequate, or do you want to have broadband that can really attract people and business investment to your community. That's a super important conversation, and it can be difficult. And you may have to circle around and talk about that several times and over time to make sure that you're pursuing the strategies that are going to really meet your needs. You know, this whole idea of building once is really important. You know, you don't want to be building something and then have to build something different in 3 or 4 years or 5 years. You want to see what your other communities have done. Think about those financial capabilities and available tools and whether your willingness, you know, to use them. You know, you may have taxing capacity locally. Are you really going to be interested in doing that? That's a critical conversation. And I think that really involves, it can't just be an ad hoc group, it has to be in partnership with your top community leadership. And then recognize those barriers or opportunities. If your city council or county board says, you know, absolutely not, we're just not going to spend tax dollars on this, that really shapes the choices that your community has. And so it's important to know that. You know, if you don't have that local commitment at the end of this process, you really need to go back again and work to do that. And we've seen, you'll hear today about the outreach efforts of the Leadership Council in Southwest Illinois and the work that they've done. A community I've worked with, they had over 100 community meetings to work with communities to build a consensus to make that go forward and really to move the elected officials forward. So if you have that commitment, you know, it's again, talking to those providers, understanding their plans, ensuring that their plans meet your needs and vision. If your provider says, yeah, we're going to improve our DSL services over the next 5 years, that may not be good enough for your community. Or if your cable company says, yeah, we're looking about edging out from the county seat community out to the area by the lake or along the river or those clusters of homes, but really don't have any plans for the rest of the kind of your market area or your county, you know, you need to find a different provider partner. And so if your partner incumbents are on board, you know, your efforts might end right there. Let's get them going. Let's try and maybe even add a little sugar to their existing plans to help them to do more that's going to meet those needs. And if you can make that happen, you can celebrate. And we're seeing more and more that in, I think it's New Hampshire, a company Consolidated has been working with communities there. And the communities are building networks that Consolidated is making use of. Consolidated didn't feel that they had the resources to build on their own. And so the community said, hey, how about if we build it and you lease it? And that worked for Consolidated. And we've seen that in other places as well, or some combination of grants and other incentives. And then understanding, you know, this feasibility study, you know, if you have to go out there and find a new provider, we really encourage you to think about, you know, understanding this. This is a real business. And so you have to understand the market demand, the revenues that are going to happen. You know, who really wants broadband? What are they willing to pay? Understand the technology options, wired and wireless. You know, certainly wired now is generally almost all fiber to the home. Any kind of new network builds is fiber. But we're also seeing certainly the emergence of fixed wireless services that now can provide up to 100 megabits down and 50 up. And especially if you're kind of out on the prairie, that kind of technology can work well. If you're in an urban area now, we're seeing a lot of fixed wireless where it's fiber or it's wireless to the building and then high quality wiring within that building to provide very good high quality broadband services. We know that fiber's capacity goes up and up and up though. So as we think about wireless technologies improving from 25 megabits to 100 megabits, that's all well and good. But fiber now is going from 1 gigabit to 10 gigabit. And so 10,000 megabits. And so that's an incredible capacity that as we think about the future, That's virtually unlimited capacity. One note on that is that people say, well, who's going to use all that capacity? And 5 years ago, that was what they said about the gigabit technologies. Well, people now are using hundreds and hundreds of gigabytes of data per month that the gigabit services really support. And as we think about, our little meeting here, two-dimensional, kind of low quality visuals, we're seeing the opportunities now for essentially people to appear to actually be in your conference room with holograms and so on. And that is real and that's coming. And when we think about medical technologies in particular, that kind of very high capacity network will be important. Through a feasibility study, you'll understand that construction, operational costs, and so on, understanding the resulting business pro formas and the need for subsidy. It's in some ways, I compare this to buying a car. If you're buying a car once every 4 years, what is your ability to really deal equally with a car dealer who might sell 10 or 20 cars a day or a week? Their knowledge is much higher. And so as you do these feasibility studies, it's important to have a great consultant partner that's going to help you through this decision-making process. You don't want a consultant that says, okay, hey, thanks a lot for the contract. I'll be back in a few weeks and have your report for you. You want this really to be a funnel, decision-making funnel, that you're gaining this information, that you're understanding it, and being able to negotiate with providers on a desired future. And then finally, just deciding to identify that provider partner and decide what you're seeking in that partner, identify your preferred and likely partners, share that study results and the community vision, and then ultimately select that partner you want to work with. That's going to be really important. This isn't like a prom date. This is a long-term relationship. And so you want to make sure that the people you're working with for the long term in your community are share your vision, share your commitment to community. And then pursue the funding as available. And now we've seen so much money coming down the pike, and we'll talk more about this at the end a little bit. We have an entire webinar on financing and partnering later in this series. So we're just going to touch a little bit today on that. But the goal is to have that infrastructure improvement. Sometimes that's going to be all at once. We've seen communities, counties cut a deal to build a whole county, build a whole community. Sometimes it's more incremental, but you want to have a partner that's with you to meet your vision of the entire community or the entire county, and not have one that says, hey, we got 95% of the business, the last 5% we'll have to find something else. That's a choice with a long-term negative impact. The other part of this for the community role is critically important, and we'll talk more about this later on in this series as well, is that stimulating adoption and use are critical community roles. It's not just about the broadband infrastructure, and you should be thinking about strategies for broadband access and use, whether you have great fiber to the home infrastructure now, or whether you have really crummy DSL service or even cellular service. The idea is, how can we maximize the use of the infrastructure we have? And there's a lot of barriers to adoption and use. In terms of adoption, many times there's affordability issues that stop people from subscribing to broadband services. Many times there's a lack of technology skills. We often think that those are kind of going away as people use more and more technology. And we've actually seen a real leap in the use of technology by, families using Zoom calls for family reunions during the pandemic, book clubs using technologies and so on. small businesses stepping up and making use of technology. But that's really something that requires care and feeding as we go. You know, broadband infrastructure is like an exercise bike. You actually have to get on and use it to maximize the value of the service. And so I've been talking quite a bit here. I'm going to check here the chat button here to see if there's questions there. Hold on 1 minute. A busy chat. You know, 5G is an interesting technology, and 5G is a standard, an international standard for wireless technologies. And that's, but people use it in very different ways, and the meaning is very different depending on who's making use of it. One of the things about 5G is that it allows a lot of devices to make use of the network at one time. But the critical differences about 5G is if you look at the different advertising that Verizon uses compared to what T-Mobile uses. And so Verizon talks about millimeter wave technology, which is very, very high frequencies that are high capacity, but don't go very far. And in many cases, won't even go through a wall or a window. And so we see a lot of 5G technologies like that in very dense environments. So like at football stadiums, we see that in college campuses or corporate campuses and so on. And you see it in downtown areas where there's a lot of people out and about, festivals and so on. That ability to handle a lot of devices, very high capacity, but extremely short distances. All these radios, 5G radios, are using fiber backbone. So it's not the radios talking to each other as much as it's radios talking to the fiber and sharing that information that way. And so that's kind of the Verizon model. And we can see those are the gigabit speed wireless technologies they talk about. The 5G that T-Mobile talks about is a mid-range spectrum, kind of in a very sweet spot of the spectrums that carry some distance, but also have some capacity. And so that's where you see the 5G getting into those maybe up to hundreds of megabits, or certainly comfortably in the high double-digit megabit kind of capabilities. That and now we see T-Mobile has a home internet program or service using 5G for fixed wireless, and we will definitely see more of that. But that won't be the gigabit services. And so 5G in rural, you can see that T-Mobile approach to that. It might have some benefits depending on where the towers are and where you live. Know that the farther you are from the tower, the slower your wireless connection will be. But it's a a coming technology there. The idea of the gigabit service out at the rural driveway, that's not going to happen anytime soon. And so you would need a radio at the end of every driveway that needs electricity, will need maintenance, replacement. There's not that much cost savings compared to a fiber to the home network if all you're saving on is a drop to the home. And so that's a critical piece of 5G. And we're going to talk more in the next webinar in 2 weeks on kind of a broadband 101. People should know that 4G service is just really finally in place at the full kind of 4G standard. And that's been a decade or more of that. And Martin, welcome. I see you're active on the chat here. You know, it's interesting on the wireless networks, and certainly you have to think about what those networks are and how to use them. And certainly one of the things I see in fixed wireless services that communities use or providers use is that depending on where you are in proximity to that tower, whether that tower is in an urban area shooting at apartment buildings, or whether it's in a rural area shooting off towers and off corn silos and so on, that can be, and depending on the topography, can be a pretty good solution, or it can be one that's kind of hit and miss. You might, I always look at it as kind of an 80% solution, that your building might be behind a big building, so you can't get service on the wireless network, or you can't get the, you might be behind the tree or the hill in the rural area. And so that going to a community wireless solution can be a challenge for, depending on where you live and what your needs are for that. We do see in Chicago, and I learned quite a bit about this recently, is these fixed wireless companies that especially target multiple dwelling units, apartments, condominiums, and so on, can be a powerful force for broadband. But it might be a challenge if that's going to be your only approach. Cheryl Watson asked about the electric grid and connection to broadband. I think that's a poor electric grid is certainly a big issue, and in supporting everything, right? And so that's a real challenge. We've seen a lot of rural electric cooperatives move into the broadband space as a way to upgrade their electrical networks, handle all the solar and wind generation that need to be coordinated, and so on. And so there's a real strong convergence of electricity and broadband that offers some real opportunities. And in many places, the electric co-ops are real community leaders in going for that broadband solution, whether that is a fixed wireless or whether it's fiber. We're seeing more and more with those electric co-ops going to fiber to the home. Cheryl, in terms of feasibility studies, we do have a list of feasibility consultants that we can share with that. And so for a small community, that shouldn't be that much money, and working with them to really understand, you know, what you have and what you could do is certainly doable. Good. So, and with that, thanks for all the questions and so on. And we'll get into a little discussion here later, but we're going to get some community examples going here. And I'm going to see what I'm doing on my time here. I'm a little early. If people have any questions, maybe we'll open it up if people have some questions right now. Okay, well, let's we'll just continue on. We're going to, I'm gonna get rid of that thing there. I'm gonna stop sharing my screen here for a moment. Hello, everyone, and then I'm going to we're going to go first to Flanagan. Is George Evans on the call yet? I should ask that.
I'm here, Bill.
Oh, good. Okay,
I'm here.
Good. Well, we'll go to Flanagan first. And Flanagan, I'll let them explain who they are and what they are. But we have Rosanna Davidson and Marty Kudla, they've been strong community champions in Flanagan. All these communities are part of the Illinois Connected Communities program. And really, we're just completing now. We have our final meeting this week where the communities are sharing their plans. We've had a dozen communities go through this process through the pandemic. And I'm tremendously proud of their work that they've done over the past year. And Marty and Rosanna, welcome.
Thanks, Bill. Glad to be here. Rosanna is, I'm sure, too. What you were saying before about not being a tech guru, that's kind of me. We stepped into this not knowing anything and wound up with, I think, something special. So I wear a lot of hats here in the village, and I was asked to step in the role of project manager for the Connect Flanagan project. And Rosanna, you want to introduce yourself?
I'm Rosanna Davidson, a volunteer, and the village contracted with me to write the initial grant. And so I've been involved as a volunteer on the back.
Pin and spotlight. I had to go back and pin and spotlight.
If for some reason our video kind of bugs out and our connection we kind of lose connection here, so if that happens, just let me know. I will shut off my video. But so we wanted to start out with a little context about Flanagan and what we're looking at. And so we're a small rural village surrounded by cornfields. We are about half a mile squared and 1,100 people. You can go to the next slide, Bill. We are one gas station in town, have no supermarket, very limited fiber. Our project was to bring fiber to the home. And we have very limited fiber running along 116 and 400, but the rest of the town for residents and local businesses is run by DSL lines, cable lines, and fixed wireless. So our first step was to find out if this would even be feasible. So we sent out surveys to residents to see if they would even be interested. I mean, we kind of knew based on comments, from Facebook and things like that, like just talking with people, that this was something that was really on the forefront of people's minds, especially with the pandemic and people being stuck at home. So we did a survey, which you see in front of you. We sent this out to all residents in town with about 440 households. And we also sent them to the businesses, about 40 of those in town. We got a great response from it. So we did 2 different mailings. The first mailing yielded about 120, 130 responses. The second mailing yielded about 60 to 80 responses. And yeah, and and then we did a walk around in town, and mainly targeted businesses for that, and we got another 30 or so for those. So, overall, we looked at about 50 to 60% response rate from this survey, which I hear is pretty high. So I think that was one of the wins for us in our community. I'll also say that the money from the Connected Communities funding went pretty far here. Being in a small community, that 15,000 went pretty far. So moving on to the next slide, we had the Isp Partners, and in our community. So I was saying that we have a DSL line that's run by Frontier. We did not go to them. They were a bigger corporation. We wanted someone local that we could talk to. So we had a couple options. We talked to Heartland, which is our cable provider. We talked to GCA, Graymont Co-op. They provide our fixed wireless here in town. And then we talked to Gridley Telephone Company, which is about 10 miles south of us. They do not service our area, but they were willing to talk with us and possibly provide fiber to the home. In fact, they were willing to do it, and they were our first choice out of these three. We were going to use GCA as kind of a backup. We wanted to go with fiber to the home rather than a fixed wireless solution if we could. So we went with Gridley. We talked with them. Very nice people. They even wrote us a nice letter for our application. But we landed on Heartland. At the time, they were in the transition of selling to Metro Communications. So we got, I don't know if Heath's number, I don't know if he's a CEO or someone higher up, but we got his number, talked with him. A lot of this is just open communication with people. Like I said, I'm not a tech guru. I don't know a whole lot about, this industry, but just being willing to talk with people, I think, is the key, especially for a smaller community. But we talked with Heath from Metro Communications, and he was open to the idea. He was kind of closed at first, but then he was open to it once we, told him what we were trying to do. And that's who we wound up partnering with. So moving on to the next slide, we wanted to fill out the application for Connect Illinois, and we wound up doing so. They handled about 60% of the application. They did what they could on their end, and then we did the community side of the application. So that included surveys, letters of support, and just I don't know, what would you say, experience from our community?
Yeah, documentation of
Yep.
need and of interest and capacity to continue with the long-term plan that we would be obligated with for adoption and use.
So they did this whole project for free to us. We only supported them in the application process, and we're doing some restoration for them, backfill and stuff like that. And we waive permit fees, very limited involvement as far as the project as a whole on this part. Of course, we did all the legwork before, but these are some of the facts that they submitted with the application. So we're looking at a $60,000 or $600,000 project, 8.25 mile fiber run. And then we're looking at deployment costs of $63,000 per mile, 1,000 per connection, roughly. And we're getting that speed up to 1 gig. So I think that's a win for us. And this is just a photo of the proposed project area. So they're going to do the whole town. I think it's a win. And I think that's it for us. I don't know if you have any questions. I saw there was a couple rural communities on. So if you have anything else, let me know.
Thanks, Marty. Thanks, Rosanna. And that was in the Illinois Connected Communities had a strong, Flanagan had a strong emphasis on the network, and that was really critical for them. Let me try and find my stop share button here. I can't find my cursor. So 1 second. Oh, there it is. There we go. That's panic in our thing here. So so that was great, and it was great that Flanagan had that strong emphasis on improving your broadband services. And in the Illinois Connected Communities program, we have this stool, broadband access, which is really infrastructure, adoption, which is really helping people afford broadband, and then knowing how to have basic skills to use it, and then use. Marty and Roseanne, do you want to talk for just a minute about what your plans are now that with the infrastructure project, hopefully imminent movement to making use of technology?
So assuming we get this fiber to the home, we'd like to do public Wi-Fi. We don't have that currently, so we'd like to initiate that. Something else, I know we're working with the library and the school just to see if there's any programs we could do with that, utilizing that high speed. So
Good.
We're going to conduct a group conversation with kind of techie people in town so that we can plan out training for people, particularly when you get a new TV set. We don't know how to use our smart TV, so more and more devices are becoming smart, and as we have them, we'll need to be able to use them, and it's not just intuitive. So we're trying to use local people to be volunteers and kind of guide training in adoption and use in the future.
Thank you. Okay. I'm having a little challenge here. Nancy, are you seeing my screen, or are you?
I sure do.
Okay. Let me get up here to do this. Good. George, welcome. George Evans is from Caskia College and the Leadership Council of Southwest Illinois. George, welcome, and thanks for joining us today.
Thank you. Thank you, Bill. I believe you have the opportunity to share our slides as well?
Yep.
Okay.
And they should be up now.
Very good. Can anybody see our slides?
They're not up. You might want to try again, Bill.
Okay.
Well, while Bill's working on that, yeah, my name is George Evans. I am the president of Kaskaskia College. For those of you that are like myself, that are geographically challenged, basically head down south and hang a right at St. Louis in Missouri and go about 60 miles to the east, and that's where we are located. And I'm here today on behalf of the college, but also as a representative of the Southwestern Illinois Leadership Council, which is an organization that's made up of 9 area counties in Southwestern Illinois. A large portion of that is the Metro East area, directly east of St. Louis, Missouri. And the Leadership Council in itself is made up of approximately 250 senior leaders, executives, through the 9-county area that really focus on economic growth and just overall growth and sustainability throughout the entire Leadership Council district. I have been fortunate enough to be chairman of the Education Committee for the last couple of years. I think this is my 2nd year for the Leadership Council. And right when I was getting ready to shift gears and do some really good things with the Leadership Council, we really got hit with the pandemic, and that really kind of leads us to where we are at today. one of the big issues that we came together and focused on the Leadership Council, especially on the Education Committee. And the committee is made up of K through 12 districts, higher education, universities, but also members of the vocational and business and industry workforce as well. Is when we transitioned to a remote environment that second week in March, it was a lot of assumptions by a lot of us educators that we know what we're doing. We'll get through this thing. And boy, did we fall flat on our face after about 2 weeks. I thought as an institution, we did a great job of getting the technology that our students needed in our staff and students' hands to get things up and running. But we were under the assumption that everybody had equal and accessible internet. And that was farthest from the case, specifically in our area. At the end of the day, about 20% of our student population and staff population really didn't have access to internet at all. You throw on top of that, when the governor issued the stay-at-home order, you had mom and dad working from home, you had multi-sibling families that were remote learning at home with multiple devices, drawing down a very weak signal if they had a signal at all. Which leads us to the Illinois Connected Communities Cohort. The Leadership Council took it upon itself to submit a grant application for the cohort, and we were fortunate enough to be one of 12 that were selected. And with the basic goal of majority of what Bill has already talked about is really just to improve the broadband capability, as well as the awareness in our entire area of just how essential broadband is to the economic and educational growth in our district. So we were fortunate enough to receive that grant. And what we have done since that time, as Bill had mentioned, is we had broken down into 3 groups. Bill, if you can advance the next slide, if you don't mind. There we go. Yeah, we broke down into 3 groups of access, use, and adoption, with the goal to really improve broadband in the Leadership Council area. And we have been, I will say that we have been very, very active. In fact, it's been very, very time consuming, but it's also been very, very rewarding. The relationships and the partnerships we've established along the way have been excellent, as well as just our familiarity of the entire broadband spectrum has definitely increased. So what we did is we broke down into 3 of these groups: access, use, and adoption. I was fortunate enough to head up the adoption committee, and there was others involved that head up the other 2 committees, access and use. With the goals of, basically, as Bill said, is to promote awareness, find out the specific needs that we have in our areas, and really target those barriers, and to bring those barriers to and bring that to the attention of anybody who would listen. As of this morning, I believe that our group has had over 85 community presentations throughout an entire district. That could be as small as this. I think the smallest town that we went to was Odin, Illinois. I think there was 11 people in attendance, all the way up to, we've actually had forums with our elected federal, state, General Assembly and elected senators and House of Representatives members, as well as we've had forums with our internet service providers as well, to really plead our case. And I will say, out of anything, what it has done is it has really brought awareness to the entire district, from the local level to the county level, all the way up to the state level. I think we have done a pretty good job at least getting on the map, but also there's still a lot of work to be done within our region. As we've also noticed that a lot of our smaller municipalities are in the middle of their strategic planning processes, or some of our counties are in the middle of their strategic planning processes. And after analyzation and after discussing or presenting to them, broadband was nowhere to be found in their strategic plan. You know, you have groups that are putting together an economic plan for 10 years, but it says nothing about their broadband infrastructure. Well, you really can't have economic growth in our area if you don't have any type of connectivity that's going to attract any type of businesses, and it's definitely not going to attract more and higher education and some of the larger industries in our area. So we really got the wheels turning with a lot of these different organizations, and we were successful enough to get a lot of these strategic plans that incorporated enhanced broadband activities. Now, I will tell you, on the other side of the fence is also the equity issue. And when we first started, we thought that equity was just basically equal access to 5G internet or stronger. Well, we really didn't pay attention to the affordability side, and that's been just as big as a challenge for us as running fiber to rural areas as well. You know, there's a lot of individuals in our district and throughout the state of Illinois that simply put cannot afford $129 a month or $130 a month for the strongest Wi-Fi that could be available to their area. So there's still that equity issue that we have to target together as the state, if it comes down to if we really want to tackle this and provide affordable and strong internet to everybody, we've really got to look at the pricing infrastructure as well. The best way I can compare that to the individuals that are new to this is, imagine having a classroom with 20 students, but only 17 of them have textbooks. That's what we've kind of really seen the last year, specifically in the remote environment. Now, I know we're coming out of the pandemic, but the remote learning and hybrid learning is really here to stay. And it's unfortunate for some of our student populations that are punished by their geographic location, that they don't have strong internet access, or they don't have the funds to pay for strong internet access. And that's really kind of been one of the bigger causes that we've taken up as the Leadership Council to continue to promote this. In addition to the breaking down into our different groups, telling the story, we have also been in the middle of very, very similar to what Marty and Rosanna have done in data collection. And we have issued several surveys, and I think our response rates have been very significant. And we're starting to obviously see trends. The biggest trends that we've seen is over 50% of the people that have completed the survey feel that their internet package is not affordable or too expensive. That's a significant ratio. And 20 to 22% of the individuals who have taken our survey also don't have strong access to internet or internet at all, even in some of our urban areas. Now, in Southwestern Illinois, we do have some urban areas. We're not all cornfields, but that was an eye-opening moment for me. With the biggest city in the colleges district is Centralia, 10,000 individuals, and one of the largest dark areas when it comes to, when I say dark areas as far as internet coverage, came out of the city of Centralia. There was whole city blocks that did not have the same access that other blocks had. But if you looked at a service provider's map, it indicated that they did have service. Well, that wasn't the case. So that again, that becomes one of our points that we need to continue to bring forth to our elected officials, as well as we continue to unite together as Southwestern Illinois Leadership Group to enhance our connectivity. Now, Bill, I think, is PCs for People on here too? I think I have a slide on here for PCs for People.
There you go.
They are.
There it is.
They are.
Okay. Yeah, I wanted to make sure that I put a plug in for PCs for People, is because, again, after the Connected Communities grant was awarded, I want to say a couple months later, the powers to be at the Leadership Council and I don't know if they applied for, or they coordinated an approach with PCs for People. And I believe that there's a couple people on here that represent PCs for People. And they were fortunate enough to land a distribution center in Belleville, Illinois, which is part of the Leadership Council district. And what PCs for People does, it's just an amazing organization. It takes donated PCs.
Hey, George,
I'm sorry?
we're running out of time a little bit.
Okay.
So.
Okay. All right. I'll zip it up. PCs for People is basically a wonderful organization where donated PCs are wiped clear and distributed to individuals who need them the most. And along that comes with some digital literacy, so we can really move forward with the internet piece. Sorry for being long-winded, Bill.
Well, that's okay, Judge.
Yeah.
The Southwest Leadership Council has done such a fabulous job with a super comprehensive approach to these issues of access, adoption, and use. I received their PowerPoint final report today, over 100 pages of activities and information gathered and so on. So kudos to your team.
Well, thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
And then I'm going to stop sharing here. And Nick, are you on?
Yeah. Hey,
Great.
Bill.
Hi, Nick. Nick Hendrick here from Brown County. Nick is coordinator for the Brown County Illinois Connected Community effort, and they're doing a great job there for a rural county. They're really making good progress. Welcome, Nick. Thanks for coming today.
Sure, Bill. And I'll, yeah, like I said, I'll just kind of jump into it. So our Illinois Connected Communities grant was actually applied for by our school district, Brown County School District. And I don't have any slides, folks, so I'm just going to talk. So the school applied for it. The superintendent reached out. I'm in a lot of different things throughout our community. So I just kind of jumped into it, young kid, kind of techie, said I want to take this on and kind of help connect Brown County. We're about 40 miles east of Quincy, Illinois. And if you've ever heard of Dot Foods, they're the largest food redistributor in the world, especially throughout the United States as well. So we're a population of about 6,500 people in the county. And Mount Sterling's county seat, about 2,000 live there. But it's kind of nice to have an $8 billion company in a town of that size that helps projects move a little bit faster. But kind of jumping into the broadband, we kind of put a team together of a whole bunch of different community members and a whole bunch of different facets of the community. And we kind of sat down and the options were kind of access, adoption, and use. And George kind of spoke about those three. But we kind of, as a team of 7 of us, we sat down and we said, if we can get people access in Brown County, we thought that adoption and use would just come with it. And that's kind of the results we have seen with doing that. And I'll kind of get into what we've done. So we initially needed to build relationships with local ISPs, internet service providers. And there's 2 of those local in Brown or around Brown County. There's not one in Brown County, but they're around. And they had fiber options and they weren't really big on wireless solutions to connect. Well, fiber is very expensive to put in, up to $30,000 a square mile in some locations of our community. So we kind of put together 2 plans and worked with Bill. And from the get-go, we knew we want to try and connect Brown County quickly because we're in the middle of a pandemic. We have kids working at home, and people just aren't. It's not working. It wasn't working in Brown County in the setup we had. So our team focused on fixed wireless solutions. Only one provider really wanted to step up to the plate, Cass Communications in our area. So that's kind of who we went with. And we've kind of been building on that ever since and kind of put fiber on the back burner. Obviously that's our long-term solution. Our original goal was 100 meg down and 20 meg up in our first plan. And this wireless solution is getting 50 to 20. So it's comparable, and it allows students to work and do what they need to at home. But there's Timewell, Versailles, Mount Sterling, and Cooperstown are really kind of where most of our students lived geographically to our school district. So Timewell, we actually were as Illinois Connected Communities came in, there's a fiber project already starting, and it was kind of that teeter-totter right before the pandemic really took off. So they were going to delay that project, and our team was able to push at that time. That was Adams Fiber to kind of finish that project. So we're going to count that as a win for our team. I don't know necessarily if it was, but we're counting it. So Timewell now has fiber. Versailles has a wireless solution. along with fiber. That's Bill, even since we last spoke, that's a new project that we've been able to work on and almost accomplished. They're working on it, installing the antennas, but the CAS Communications came in, they put fiber throughout for sales, and there's a few people on the edge that didn't get connected, and they're going to get set up with this wireless setup. Mount Sterling, it's a very rural community. Like I think Marty and Roseanne said, it's a lot of cornfields around like that. And so everybody's kind of really spread out. So getting fiber to some of these areas really isn't realistic, probably long term. It might be, but wireless was definitely going to be the quicker solution. So we've connected. We started at 50% is what we evaluated in Mount Sterling and these connected communities to Mount Sterling. We said 50% of the people could get service. So 50% of Brown County. And we believe that's at 85% now. 85% of people can get some sort of connection, whether that's cellular, fixed wireless, or fiber. So that's probably one of our biggest accomplishments throughout working with Bill and his team, is just being able to actually in less than a year connect these people. And it all stems back to the relationships that I was able to build with those ISPs, and our team was able to help build and go through that process. And that's the one thing, anybody going into this and doing this for a first time, it's a process. I'm one of those guys where if I feel like I can just go out and do it, and my team is the same way, we can see it in front of us, but we just can't do it. And our whole team are doers. So it was very difficult for us just to kind of sit there for weeks maybe and wait on ISPs to get back to you with that process. And that can be very discouraging and cause your team not to want to work as hard, but we stuck with it. We stuck with the plan Bill helped us build. And like I said, we're at that 85% mark now, which is great. Also, another huge benefit we had, Bill, and I want to make sure you're on schedule still, but we were able to get a really good partnership going with Geo Specialists, and they are a speed test. Well, they do more than speed tests, but we used them on the speed test aspect initially when we were trying to figure out exactly where we should work with our ISPs and get wireless to cover our communities. We sent out this speed test that was able to track data, addresses. It was kind of pinpointing location, and it would give our team a speed. It would be like green, red, black for no, red was low, green was good, black was no service. And we were able to really kind of pinpoint the areas of which we needed to focus on to get that wireless connection shot out. The ISP was using a combination of their own towers, and they built a tower and somebody's grain bin. So the process, it doesn't have to be pretty to get these people connected. Is the best way. You can use grain bins. You can use barns. We have a barn set up. There's an old antique shop in Cooperstown, Illinois, that now is connected with wireless, and it is providing signal to that whole community. So it's just kind of a process, and you just keep working through it. You can't quit on it. If you quit on it, nobody else will do it. It's one of those types of projects. So that's kind of, Bill, that's kind of where we're at in Brown County. We've had a heck of a ride. I know that. So
you guys have done a great job, and each of our teams have had really special leaders involved in making things happen, and then a great team. So Nick, thanks for your work, and certainly Marty and Rosanna have been, citizen leaders that are making things happen. So and now you should hear them sling the lingo around, because they know they're experts now.
I mean, and Bill, hats off to you and your program. I mean, you guys did a hell of a job through a pandemic and this whole project. I mean, thank you. So,
well, someday I'll come to Brown County.
Hey, we'll go to Hagel and eat the Dot Foods restaurant. I'll take you there. My treat.
All righty, sounds good. Thank you, Nick.
Thank you.
And then I'm just gonna finish my presentation here. And I know we talked about the, oh, stop that. And can't seem to. So we're going to talk about, let me try this one more time. Hold on, I'm sorry for, I'm out of practice on these things, I have to say. So I'll have to get Nancy to help me next time on my thing. So there we go. Well, I'm just having a little trouble here. So we don't have very much left. So I'm just going to talk a little bit about the financial tools and programs. And, you know, there's, with the pandemic, there's just oh, there we go. Thank you, Nancy. If you want to go down to that financial tools and program one towards the end there with that puzzle piece, 15, thank you. Let's see, we have redundancy here, so, and experts, so thank you. So there's never been more talk and more money coming for broadband, and from a variety of sources. And it is really an interesting time for broadband. You know, Illinois has one of the largest programs for broadband with the Connect Illinois program. And there's not, some of these programs aren't the easiest to work with. It's a different process for providers. They need to get oriented to it. But that's a beautiful resource and a huge amount of money available for good projects. And so we've seen Flanagan jumped in, Marty and Rosanna learned how to do these grant applications. The provider provided information, and they were able to submit that in a partnership format. But now with the federal government, we have the American Rescue Plan Act, and that is dollars coming directly to cities and counties and townships. Broadband is a primary purpose for those program dollars. And so I really encourage you to think about how to best invest your dollars there. NTIA has a program open right now for $300 million for provider partnerships that require private-public partnerships. And so making use of that one. If you have tribal communities in your area, you can make use of those. There's $1 billion right now open for that. And this is even before, we still hope there's an infrastructure bill before the Congress, and hopefully they can get that done. And we know that broadband will be a part of that. And so as we go to the next slide, you know, the real thing, you have to be prepared. You know, every program is unique. And so there's all kinds of webinars on each one of these programs. Right now, the NTIA out of the Department of Commerce is a primary source for funding. And so you should look at those. Those webinars are always archived, so you can take a look at them. But know that every source, every program has different rules, program requirements. One issue that at the federal government now is that towards the end of last year, the federal government through the FCC had an auction called the RDOF auction, RDOF. And if you Google that, you can find out kind of if your area was a part of that and who was your provider and who won those dollars. And that auction was quite a surprise for people. We kind of thought that we'd see local companies, incumbent providers bidding on those dollars to build fiber optics to the home. Instead, we saw some relatively small companies that are generally wireless companies bid very low to take the money and they say they're going to provide fiber optics. And right now the FCC is deciding whether to fund these companies or not. They kind of preliminarily won those awards, and the real question of whether they'll get the money. So, but all the federal programs now kind of say no duplication of funding. So right now I see a lot of communities rushing forward to try and cut deals with other providers, more local providers, essentially because that FCC money is not in place right now. There's no legal agreements with those winning auction companies. So that's there's a lot of uncertainty due to that RDOF program. But know that these GIS mapping tools are essential because to find out those areas that are eligible. Some programs have low income requirements, like the Small Cities Development Grant programs and so on. If you're ready, if you have your partnerships in place, you're really much more easy to move forward on these projects in the time that they allocate, because many times these application windows are just 60 days long. And if you're starting on day 1, you'll never get to the finish line by day 60. And so to be prepared. My best advice to you, my most important advice is find a good partner and be a good partner. Don't work with one provider for, trying to get the deal done, and at the end kind of ditch them for a better offer late in the process. Do your work up front, find out who you want to be your partner, and reach a deal with them. You don't want to, these companies have a lot of expenses, and understanding what are the costs of the project, to do the engineering, to do the financial analysis, and to bail on them at the end, I think is kind of being a bad partner. And so I'd encourage you to avoid that. I'd like to, we're right about at our time. And Nancy, if you want to go to the next one. There's really just a few minutes for any discussion or information in the chat. So any questions or comments that people would like to jump into? Well, with that, I want to thank you for your attendance and participation. We have our sessions going on every couple weeks, generally over the next couple months, to get through these 5 webinars. Next one is on Broadband 101. The next one is the kind of partnerships in deal doing. And then the 4th one will really be on best practices and case studies. And finally, the 5th one on affordability and access or adoption. So we look forward to this series. We think it's well designed. I'd encourage you to look at the past webinars that Nancy has archived on the site, the extension site, and you can look back at last year's series. And if you're hurrying and trying to get some things going, there's great information there. So thank you so much, everyone, and have a great day.
And thanks to Flanagan Brown and Southwest Illinois, who were really star performers in the Illinois Connected Communities, for presenting today. Thanks, guys.